Welcome to the inaugural episode of my little book chat I'm starting up that I'm calling Bookbanter. No surprise there if you know me at all on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @Bookbanter. And I wanted to kind of start off just explaining how my reading life has been and where I kind of all started. Kind of setting up then to me doing episodes on different books and different series and things like that. And you'll kind of see where I'm all coming from with this introductory episode, or possibly 2 episodes, depending on how long it goes. So reading for me started way back when I was a little kid. I actually didn't read too much as a little kid other than required readings and things like that. And I could read, obviously, and everything, and got a bit into reading, but not that obsessed with it as I would later become. And it really wasn't until I was about 12 or 13 when I was introduced by a teacher to, I think it was my English teacher, to a Canadian author named Willard Price. He had been writing in the 50s and 60s. By the time I was reading him in the 90s, he'd long passed away. And he wrote about these series of books all ending in adventure. There was Amazon Adventure and South Sea Adventure and Africa Adventure, Antarctica Adventure. And it would always be about a family, specifically the 2 sons of the dad who was now older and wasn't able to do the job that he'd been doing his whole life, which was going around the world and capturing animals for zoos and animal parks, things like that. Again, because this was written in the 50s and 60s, that was a lot more common. The idea of it now seems pretty freaky, a little more old-fashioned. The idea of capturing animals now and keeping them caged up in these smaller zoos is not great at all. So I don't know if they do what the hell they do with that anymore. Anyway, I'm not really a fan of small zoos as it is. It's the big animal parks I like, and if there's a chance, they should just stay in their natural habitat. But anyway, going off of this tangent here, he always wrote about these 2 brothers, Hal and Roger, and who were the sons of the dad who was basically too old now to be doing this. And so the series starts off with them going to Quito in Ecuador and starting to go down the Amazon and charting it and collecting animals along the way. And this is the first time that the dad actually gets hurt and can't go, so he leaves it up to the 2 boys to do it. In hindsight, at the time, the boys are, I'm trying to remember, I think like 17 and 13, which seems pretty crazy to me, but at the time reading it, it was perfect because I was the same age as the youngest brother, and then reading them over the years as I got older, I got to the same age as the older brother and could keep identifying with it. And it just opened me up to a whole world of reading that I hadn't really experienced before, through a good series, strong characters, an interesting story, and it started my love of zoology too, which I still really enjoy. I was trying at one point to pursue it as a career, but never quite worked out. But I still always have a fascination with nature documentaries. David Attenborough is my happy place. If I ever need to chill out sometime, I just throw him on and just lose myself in his documentaries. So that series was really what started me voraciously reading. Pretty much since then, I have never not been reading. I've always been reading a book, an audiobook. Often now, for the last 10 years or so, it's been multiple books. And from Willard Price, I got moved on then to other authors. I started with Stephen King then. Actually, before that was Christopher Pike. I got really into him as a teenager and reading all of his books and just really getting caught up in the cool, unusual, supernatural stories. His blending of like mythology and horror was just really my kind of thing. Got me then leading on to Stephen King and Clive Barker. And eventually I did Lord of the Rings and lots of other books. I do want to mention real quick one cool little story about Willard Price. A number of years ago, 15 years ago now or so, when I was living, after coming back from college and living with my wife here in a town called Petaluma, when we were had our own little place and a bunch of bookcases, and we started collecting all these books because we basically could. And we would hit all these thrift stores and charity stores, and just load up on books that we want to, most of them we planned to read but never actually did read. But we loaded up on them, and I think at one point we had like 4,000 or 5,000 books, which was just really fun at the time, and then got rid of them all as we moved. But I found this awesome thing in one of the thrift stores where there were a couple of Willard Price books. Now, these weren't the kids' adventure books that I'd grown up reading. These were his nonfiction books, because he traveled around the world a lot. I think he went out on a few science expeditions and just did a lot of exploring and wrote books about these different trips he took around the world. I think one of them was a trip down the Amazon, things like that. So I found a couple of these hardcover books of his adventures that he did around the world. And in one of them, there were a couple of postcards, which I thought was interesting, and I think a letter. And then I opened them up, and it turned out that they were written by Willard Price and sent to this person, whoever was the original owner of these books, along with the books, presumably. They might be signed, too. I forgot to check that. I'm pretty sure they're autographed as well, actually. And considering he passed away in the late 80s, I think, it's a pretty amazing find. And it's just this fun little letter of just thanking this person. They were obviously friends, and passing along these books and these postcards. So it's a kind of little cool memento I found at a thrift store once, and now it's something I can treasure, having begun with this author, and he got me into reading, so it's kind of a special little thing. So you never know what you might find in a thrift store, so always check them out. Going back to reading, as I was then reading all these other authors and Stephen King, getting really into him and loving everything he did, that started off my writing interest and started me writing as well. Move on next then when I went to college at Long Beach State. Actually, no, I started at San Jose State for one semester and then transferred down to Long Beach. And at the college newspaper, there were two college newspapers there. One was run by the journalism department, and the other one, the Long Beach Union, was a student-run paper, just by a bunch of students from campus, not necessarily their major for journalism or writing or anything like that. They just wanted to work for this newspaper. And so that's where I ended up starting doing some news articles and things like that. That's where I actually met my wife, which was pretty cool. And we just celebrated our 16th wedding anniversary about a month ago. And that's also where I saw with the newspaper because we were in the LA area, we were getting tons of CDs every week and tons of movie tickets and even concert tickets to go and review all these different events. And that started me thinking, well, if we can get all this stuff for music and movies, there's no reason we can't get it for books too, right? And this was kind of this was around 2000, 2001, 99 through 2001, so kind of early-ish days of the internet and things being on there and people being a lot more accessible. So that's where I started just finding these major publishing websites, finding the contact info for press, and then sending off requests and saying, we're a student-run newspaper. We have a student body of, I think it was 30,000 students, probably more now. And we want to start up a literature page with all these book reviews. Please send us books. And I hit all these different publishers, all the ones I could find, and waited. And then slowly but surely the books started coming in, and then it became an avalanche. And so for the next 3 years that I was at college there, I basically got to get pretty much any book I wanted. I got all the new Stephen Kings that way. A number of them I got actually as advanced readers, which was pretty cool. So I'd get them sometimes two months in advance before the book's even out, which was just awesome. My last year, I was actually the editor-in-chief of the newspaper, and I got to put a big Stephen King review on the front cover because I could do it as the editor-in-chief. So that started off I started that whole literature page, and as far as I know, it's still going now. But it also created a link between me and publishers, so that when I left college, when I was looking for a job, I automatically gravitated towards working at a bookstore because it seemed like a right fit for me. It's something I knew a lot about already. 12 years down the line, I've worked at 3 bookstores. Well, technically it's 2 bookstore chains, but I've worked at 4 different of those bookstores. Copperfield's Books, which is a local chain here in Sonoma County. I've worked for them at 2 different stores. One when I started right out of college, and they still remember me there. And then another one I helped open up 7 years ago. And then before that, I was working at Borders. Worked as a merchandise supervisor and then moved up and got promoted as assistant manager and moved to another store then. But ever since then, I've just had this, long connection with books and knowing books. Yes, it's retail, but the people you work with are book people, which is really special. I mean, the conversations we'd have, the fun we'd have, it was like nothing else, really. But that then was a stepping stone to my next venture, which was something I called Bookbanter. And here's where we'll end this episode for now. Please join me next time in a couple weeks with Bookbanter Chapter 2, Why Alex Loves Reading, and you'll hear the end of this story with my love affair with books. See you then. Thank you for listening to Bookbanter. This episode was performed and recorded by me, Alex Telander, with help from Hale & Wilmette Podcast. The music featured in this episode is my favorite piece of classical music in the world, Fantasia on a Theme by Thomas Tallis, composed by Ralph Vaughan Williams, courtesy of Musopen. Find out more at musopen.org. In the episode, I mentioned my Willard Price book collection with some signed copies and an actual postcard from the author. You can see photos of this by following the link in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, you can do so by buying me a coffee at ko-fi.com/AlexCTelander. You can reach me at alexctelander@gmail.com with any comments, questions, or suggestions, or just to chat. Or find me on Twitter under the username @Bookbanter. Until next time, thanks for listening.